Alrighty, folks, welcome back to the Suhu podcast. This week we are entering our Spring Reveals What Changes series. So, last week we talked about what Spring reveals about what's inside our products. The next 4 weeks we're going to be talking about what Spring reveals about what changes with our skincare routines and our skincare products. So thank you for joining us. And as a thank you, we want to announce a special discount just for our listeners. Go ahead and just put in podcast 25 for an extra 25% off your purchases at suhuskin.com. Yay. We really do need a soundboard so we can hit the little soundboard buttons.
We do.
That would be fun. All right, so to kick off our Spring Reveals What Changes series, we're going to be talking about what changes in humidity. Humidity is one of those things that people feel pretty intuitively, but they don't always think about it. So you notice it when the air feels dry, and you notice it when your skin starts to feel tight, or when everything suddenly feels easier in a more humid environment. But what's actually changing there isn't just your personal comfort, but the environment that your skin is operating in. And that environment directly affects how your skin is physically holding on to water. So today we're going to talk about what humidity actually changes, not in a general sense, but in terms of how your skin is going to behave day to day. Lydia, when we talk about humidity from a skin perspective, what's actually shifting?
Yeah, so there's a couple things to think about as the weather changes, right? One is that the water content of the air is increasing typically. So you're going from really cold, dry air to slightly warmer, slightly wetter air, which means that the products that you need to use change a little bit for most people. And then also along with that is the temperature change too. And when temperature changes, different things happen in your skin as well. So I think we'll get into some of that today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think kind of from the chemistry side of things, I think it's interesting to talk about water, like transepidermal water loss, which you have on there. I think it would be good to talk about temperature basically changes how your skin produces oil. And so sometimes temperature increasing will actually cause your skin to be more saturated with its own oil. And so you don't need as much oil product. And then really that changes your routine, not necessarily meaning you want to drop or switch all your products. I think we've kind of talked about before, but basically you want to think about diluting the use of some of the more oil heavy products.
When people hear humidity, I think that a lot of people think about heat, out in the muggy, hot, humid air. But humidity is really about how much water vapor is actually being held by the air around you. So higher humidity means that the air is holding onto more water, and lower humidity just means that the air has more capacity to pull water from somewhere else. And that somewhere else can often be your skin. And so your skin ends up being one of those sources. So right away, humidity is setting the baseline for how easily water is leaving your skin.
Yeah, totally. And that's why sometimes if you go on vacation to a tropical location, right, your skin, you're like, oh, my skin is so moisturized, right? Well, that's because the humidity is just higher in those locations. And what you really kind of want to think about, right, is if you are in a place with 4 seasons, so you're transitioning out of winter right now into spring and then eventually into summer, the humidity is rising a little bit, and that is enough to affect your skin, even if you're not necessarily going from a freezing cold to really hot temperature, right? The gradient still changes. And so sometimes if you've been, I grew up in Minnesota, if you were out in the winter and you were wearing a Vaseline on your face or really thick shea butter, now that spring is happening, if you were to just cover your face in Vaseline or shea butter, you might end up starting to feel oh, my skin is too oily or it's too greasy, things like that, right? And some of that is simply to do with the fact that our skin is holding onto the moisture better, because unlike in the winter, we're not losing the moisture constantly to the dry air. So the really nice thing to kind of do is just kind of feel it out with your skin, right? You don't necessarily have to change your whole routine, but if you are using a heavy occlusive on your face, maybe save that for your nighttime routine, for example, when you go to sleep, versus putting it on during the daytime and the nighttime. Or you can always rely more heavily on your lotion and then just use the occlusive when you want to like spot a dry area or something like that on your body. But essentially, you want to just start to transition as you start to feel your skin transition. And for some people, if you have just naturally dry skin, you may not end up changing your routine at all. And that obviously is totally fine, right? Like this all just kind of depends on how your skin works, right? So yeah.
Yeah, my skincare hack for dealing with humidity is moving to the desert. Then it's dry 24/7. You don't have to deal with the four seasons, and your skincare routine barely has to change at all.
Exactly. And I'm in Miami, which is another place, right, where, it's typically pretty humid here all year long. But I also have very naturally just pretty dry skin. So I still use shea butter in, the humid weather, but I am cognizant of like when my skin feels really saturated with water versus like when it's drying out. And so I kind of have my own way of playing with the amount of things that I'm using on my face to keep it healthy, to keep it consistent. So I'm not just like switching out products left and right.
Totally. And even if you're not somewhere like Miami or Arizona where it's really hot or it's particularly humid, your skin is constantly losing water all the time. And that's normal. It's something called transepidermal water loss, but the rate of that loss changes depending on your environment. And so in these higher humidity places like, say, Miami, the gradient between your skin and the air is a lot smaller and water is going to leave your skin a lot more slowly. But in low humidity situations like out here in Arizona, there's a vast gradient between the dry desert air and my luscious moist skin. And so the air is going to try to pull that water out of my skin much more aggressively. And so even if your routine doesn't change, your skin can feel completely different depending just on the humidity level.
Totally. Yeah, and another trick too is like if you are feeling like maybe you want to still use some of your like heavy occlusive, but you're not sure if your skin is already, too moisturized or something, you can, mix a little of your lotion with your occlusive and just thin it out a little bit. Or another trick is, when you get out of the shower, your skin is like a little damp. So it's already kind of moisturized, right? And so you can add, the oil like on top of slightly damp skin. And that's going to kind of keep that moisture in while also diluting the oil a bit because you've got water on the surface. So it's kind of like diluting it across your skin. So you don't have to necessarily be like, switching everything out. You can kind of use some of those tricks too.
I love those tricks too because I think a lot of people get nervous around oils and especially in occlusives, they feel very heavy to put on your skin. But yeah, you don't have to jump straight to just lathering your face in your favorite occlusive. You can, like you were saying, just mix it into your lotion a little bit and take the edge off.
So another thing that isn't always chatted about in this kind of conversation around like why oils and occlusives can sometimes feel heavy or sticky is really the temperature change that happens, over the course of the year. Along with the humidity change, often you will start to see the temperature go up, right? And what's really interesting is your skin naturally is producing its own oils, right? We have sebaceous glands in our skin and they produce oils. And those are the oils that, really help us to maintain our own skin barrier, right? And so we've talked in the past about like how a lot of our products use jojoba oil because jojoba mimics the natural oils that your body is producing for itself, right? But as the temperature starts to rise, you actually see, generally speaking, more oil production from your own glands. So if you are starting to put oil on your face and you're wondering why it feels more sticky, for example, in hotter weather, sometimes it's just because your skin is literally already saturated with its own oils, right? And so in that case, your skin barrier really can't hold anymore. So you're just putting oil on top of, an already, saturated skin system. And so when you think about like how to use oil in your routine, the way I like to think about it is like different parts of your body tend to feel different. Like I just have particularly like dry shins, right? So I always, after I shower, I always put body oil on because I never ever feel like my body is sticky after that, right? But my face sometimes after I shower in really hot, humid weather, I'm like, okay, I can feel it. It's saturated. I don't really need to add, that oil or that occlusive on top. I can just use a little bit of moisturizer. So really kind of like playing around with it and just seeing like what feels good on your body is kind of key. And then you can, keep the ingredients that work for you and just kind of play with them. But yeah, a lot of people don't necessarily know that, your body just naturally starts to do different things at different temperatures, which is interesting to me from a science, chemistry background.
Yeah, your body is your best friend. So if you are able to listen and feel what your body is feeling, it'll tell you a little bit about how to take care of it. That's really good
Totally.
insight.
Totally.
So we're talking about humidity because it's the spring season. Spring came a little earlier where we live, but just about now, everyone should be encountering at least the very beginnings of spring. But humidity, it's not just changing between the seasons. It can also just change day to day. Like I brought up that I live in Arizona. It's mostly very, very dry here, but we do get monsoon season where you wake up and it's incredibly hot and very dry. And then by the afternoon, it is pouring rain. And then the rest of the day is quite humid. So it can change day to day. It can change morning to night. It can change indoors to outdoors. If you're living somewhere hot and humid, you're probably in AC a lot of the day. That's going to dry out the air as it gets cooler because cold air holds less moisture than warm air. But as you step outside into the nice, warm, muggy air, you're going to encounter a lot more humidity. In spring, we're dealing with a lot of transitions, not just the season, but indoor, outdoor, hot, cold, humid, not humid. What are the key takeaways here when we're looking at our skincare routines, Lydia?
Yeah, and I mean, you also hit the nail on the head with the indoor outdoor thing. Like, even though we're in spring, it still can be chilly outside, and then you go into your office, and your office is really, really cold or really hot. Like, there's a lot of different environments that we put our skin in, right? And I think the key takeaway, in my opinion, is to not is to really think about what is simple and what works for you and keep it consistent. And we talked a lot about consistency in the winter, and that still needs to come into the spring and summer too, even though it's a transitionary period, right? So like I said, don't throw away your key routine, or don't start to add in different products unless you're going to do so in sort of a measured and careful manner. Remember that it still takes, 28 days for your skin to really get used to a product and to really see change. So just because your skin is starting to feel a little bit more moisturized or a little bit, less dry, doesn't mean that you should just start throwing different things at it. I really recommend looking at your routine and just adjusting when you use the product or the amount of the product, and not necessarily getting rid of things and adding new things in. Obviously, if you do want to add something in, my recommendation for that is always if it's a recommendation on your by your dermatologist, that's great. Follow their direction. If you're doing something at home, just always patch test things. Make sure that you give yourself a few days to kind of see the effect on your skin, and then start applying it, and give yourself a couple weeks to really get used to the product. Really, this is just important because if you want long-term skin health, right, the goal is to really, if you want long-term skin health, the goal is to really support it with a sturdy routine that works the whole year. So in conclusion, really, we want to build a routine that lasts throughout the year, right? And then we maybe are making gentle shifts based on what our skin needs, but we're not looking to make massive changes. Ideally, we're always creating something that supports our skin barrier and really supports long-term longevity of our skin health.
Totally, yeah. I think last season we talked a lot about building a routine geared towards winter. As if you don't recall, winter's going to cool the air off a bit. It'll make it less humid, and then the struggle there is, how do I keep that moisture in my face? So we're talking about a lot of hydrating products, oils to protect your skin barrier, occlusives if you're really going hardcore. And if you just keep doing that into the spring, you're going to find that your winter routine feels very heavy. And it's not because it stopped working, it's just because like we've said, the environment has changed. But as you were saying, we don't want to just chuck that whole routine out the window. It takes 28 days to see any changes to your skincare, and ultimately consistency is the key. So Lydia, what if I have a very simple skincare routine? I'm washing my face with my cleanser. I've got the lotion that I'm applying. I let that chill for a bit. I'm still in my winter mode, so I throw an oil on after that, and I'm going on a hike later, so I hit the occlusive as well. I go out on my hike and I'm like, wow, my face feels incredibly heavy. What do I need to do? Because I know we don't want to just toss that all out the window. So what stays, what relaxes, What would you
Yeah.
advise?
Well, in your case, in the example of the hike, right? Even though you're in Arizona, it's hot outside. And so, like I said, your skin is naturally producing more oil. You're like hot. You're doing an exercise. You're, sweating potentially. And all these things are combining together to like make the occlusive not really helpful in this case, right? Remember, an occlusive is a barrier, it's holding in moisture and it's, really effective against dry weather. But if your body does not need you to be holding in any moisture, it's going to feel heavy and sticky and gross, right? So earlier I kind of mentioned in the podcast, like, my recommendation would be if your skin is still kind of dry sometimes, just apply that occlusive lightly at night. You can also dilute it in your lotion if you want to, or you can just simply apply less. But at night, right, like we're in a more controlled environment inside our house, we probably have AC on, right? So in that case, we're in a more low humidity environment and we're also resting, so we're not necessarily expending a lot of energy and sweating and all these things. So that's typically what I do is I'll put that on at night and then I'll wake up in the morning, my skin will be nice and bright, and then I'm not really applying like the shea butter throughout the day, right? Or I'm just using it as a spot treatment. So it's really kind of like just finding the right time during the day, and then also just decreasing the amount would be my second recommendation. And for some people, if their skin really does not need an occlusive at all, right, like don't force anything. Like I know some people who their skin is moisturized and they maybe apply lotion once a day and their skin is so soft to the touch, so sometimes
Lucky ducks.
you don't need it, and that's okay.
So it sounds like instead of asking what products do I need right now, it's more useful to ask what's the environment doing and what is my body telling me, because that humidity is really going to set the conditions that your skin is working in. It's changing how quickly the water is moving in and out of your face, or mostly just out of your face, I guess. And it's changing how your products behave, and it's changing how stable your barrier feels. So the goal isn't to have your perfect routine set that's consistent all year round and never changes. It's more have your products that you have, identify the products that work for you, and then figure out when your body needs them, when the environment is asking for a little more, a little less.
Exactly.
And ultimately still giving your skin enough consistency that it's not freaking out.
Exactly.
In closing, humidity doesn't show up on the label, unfortunately, but it does change how your skin behaves, and it changes how everything you use performs. This time of year, spring, isn't about fixing your skin or chucking your routine or spring cleaning everything. It's really just about recalibrating a routine that you already have that already was working for you before, but now you're in a new environment. So when things feel inconsistent, it's not necessarily a signal to do more. A lot of the time, it's just a sign that things are changing and your skin is catching up. If you guys want to go deeper into this topic, we wrote a whole blog about it on our website, suhuskin.com/blog. And then as a reminder, podcast listeners, we're giving you guys 25% off ongoing. The code for that will be podcast25. So thanks for joining us. Feel free to leave us any comments, questions, concerns. We love hearing from you guys. And we will see you next week in our Spring Reveals What Changes series, where we will talk about what changes when ingredients travel. So thanks, guys, and we'll see you soon.
Bye. Nice. Cool.
Okay.